Hello and welcome to the Rogue Monkey podcast, the show that shares insightful stories to motivate, inspire and support you following your dreams on your journeys through both work and life. We're excited to be starting season 9 and we've got some incredible guests joining us over the next 8 weeks, and we cannot wait to hear what you take from our conversations. It's really humbling to hear the impact that some of our guest stories have had on you. For our 65th episode, we are speaking to Charley Boorman, motorbike enthusiast, actor, presenter and charity supporter. Now, you often hear the phrase, "I'd love to see more of the world." Well, Charley and his friend Ewan McGregor took that quite literally and drove round the world from London to New York, the long way. And then a few years later from John O Groats to Cape Town, and then most recently from the southernmost tip of South America to LA. Those 3 trips totaled 47,000 miles of travel on a motorbike, and combined with some of Charley's other activities means he's seen more of the world than most of us can ever imagine. In today's discussion, we start all the way back in Charley's Irish roots and some of his early experiences, and track his whole journey right up to today. Just before we start the show, we'd ask if you can give us a quick subscribe on whatever platform you're joining us today. And after the episode, please give us a quick rate and review, as it helps the show reach more people, which we are super passionate about. As always, if you want to know more about the podcast or the team, head over to the website, theroguemonkey.org. Right, let's get into Season 9 and Episode 65 of the Rogue Monkey podcast. Charley Boorman, reflecting on the journey of a life on 2 wheels. Hello, Charley, and welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hey, not bad at all. Thank you for having me on your illustrious show. I feel very honoured to be here.
Well, most certainly the honour's mine. Really excited.
So you'll pay me the $5 for that, will you? Just to make it sound like, you know.
I thought we agreed 10.
Oh.
But thanks for obviously sharing some time with us today. I've given the listeners and the viewers just a bit of an introduction, but if you can just give a bit of an overview as to kind of who you are and your headline background.
Well, wow, I don't know. Well, I suppose my father is a film director, and he directed films like Deliverance, Excalibur, and Hope and Glory, and Emerald Forest, and loads of movies. And actually, he's just been knighted this year. He's the second film director in history to be knighted. So anyway, he's dead pleased about that. But so with my father, he traveled all over the world making movies and was very adventurous and made very, very difficult movies in really difficult locations. And as children, we all just followed him and you know, and whenever there was a kid in a film, he'd throw us in there because we were free, basically. And so I mean, these days there are helplines for that type of thing. You know, so we just sort of traveled all over the world, and then when we weren't traveling around the world, we were living up in the mountains in Wicklow in Ireland, very rural part of the world. You know, 50 years ago when we first moved there, and that's where I kind of learned the love of the wilderness and outside, and I started off riding horses because my father was bonkers on horses, and I used to just, you know, tear around the Irish countryside on horses, and then my great friend of mine, Tommy Rochford, had a Mako 400 2-stroke, which was the bomb in those days. I mean, that was the bike, and I remember convincing him to give me a go on his bike, and I couldn't reach the pedals of the motorcycle, so he put me on the bike and put it in first gear, and I rode around the field and then fell off, and that was it for, you know, riding motorbikes, and they've been with me, like all of us who ride motorbikes. You know, they're always with you in some way. And then I started making. I had some success making movies, in particular a film called The Emerald Forest, which was globally a big success. And then I started making more movies, but I kept choosing movies for their location and not really the script. So that I fucked up my career in that way. And then somewhere down the line, I made a movie with Ewan McGregor, a film called The Serpent's Kiss, which was my big comeback movie, and with Pete Postlethwaite and Greta Scacchi and Richard E. Grant, and Ewan McGregor and me. And anyway, that movie was shit and went straight to the bin. I had great fun making it, but And then I met Ewan, and we became great friends, and we both just had our first child at the same time. Anyway, we just stayed friends and ran motorbike race teams for ages, or helped run motorbike race teams, and then eventually decided to sort of do a long way around and a long way down. So did those, and then I did a whole load of other TV shows, raced to Dakar, did the Dakar Rally, traveled all over the world doing stupid things. Yeah, so just got lucky, really.
It's incredible to kind of immerse yourself, I guess, in something that was effectively a childhood passion, but actually that's ended up becoming something a lot more than that. And obviously some of the experiences, obviously you've alluded to there, I'm sure we'll explore in a minute. But at what point did it go from being, I quite like doing this in terms of a hobby and it's a passion of mine, to actually I can forge a career possibly for the rest of my life in it?
I think it like all these things, it's never as easy as it sounds, you know. I think I met Ewan quite a long time ago, 26, 27 years ago. My career was already sort of heading south, where he was sort of, you know, rocketing it into success. So I ended up starting to do a lot more painting and decorating, doing people's houses up, and I started to do that more and more, rather than making movies. And then occasionally I would make the odd film like I made with Ewan and stuff like that. So my acting career was sort of ebbing away from me. And that was partly because of me, because I'm very heavily dyslexic, and I find it really hard to learn lines, and I get super, super stressed out doing it. So I think part of me was that. And then I was getting to a point where I had to sort of think, shit, my career is not really going the way I want it to, and that it's going to become more and more as a builder, developer type of person. So I was just on that cusp of having to make that decision, and it was a painful decision to have to come to terms with the fact of losing your artistic filming and stuff, and all the while I was doing track days and little weekends away with Ewan and other mates on motorbikes and stuff. And then one day Ewan rang me up, and you know, we'd always talked about doing long journeys, and we talked about riding our bikes down the south of Spain, meeting our families down there for a holiday, summer holiday, riding back, or, you know, like I think we all do. And then one day Ewan rang me up and he said, "Look, Charlie, I've got this idea, and I think you should come round." And he said, "Look, forget the south of Spain." And he had this big map of the world on the kitchen table. And he said, "Look, my wife was brought up in China. Why don't we ride to China and back?" I thought, well, that's a good idea. And then we quickly realized that China was a ball ache to get into. And then we thought, well, if we're going to go that far, then we met online this guy called Millennial Ride. And he, in 2000, and he had ridden the Road of Bones, and we'd seen it and got in contact with him, and he was still on his big world journey, and he was telling us all about it, saying it's just, out of all the riding he'd ever done, that was the place to go, was the Road of Bones. But he said, but you need to if you're going to go, you need to organize one of these Russian 4x4 trucks, because some of the rivers you'll never get over. And we thought, and we looked at it on the map, and we thought, you know, then, well, if we're going to go to Magadan, Far East Russia, we may as well go over to Alaska and New York. Seemed like a logical thing to do. So if you're ever organizing these journeys with a mate to go along, or convince your family that it's a good thing to do, you know, don't get a really big map, get a small map. And then the distances don't look that bad. You know, you say, well, we're just going to go from here to here. It's really simple. But so that's kind of how it kind of started, really. And then I quickly we decided it was going to take sort of 4.5 months or so. And I kind of sort of started to realize that, you know, I had 2 kids, a wife, mortgage, you know, I'm painting and decorating and doing people's houses up, starting to take that more as a career. You know, I didn't really have any money, you know, and it was quite tough for Ollie and I, because that was a 10-year period of, you know, of the painting and decorating thing. And Ewan said, well, I don't know, you know, let's just see, maybe my name might be able to help. Maybe we could get something. So so we started sort of sniffing around, and then someone said it would make a good book, two friends traveling around the world, you know, and not really knowing what was going to happen, you know. So we sort of did that, and then a book company weren't interested, and that kind of gave us hope. And then we thought, well, I'm dyslexic, and I think Ewan's half dyslexic, and we thought, shit, how are we gonna write the book if we get a book deal? And then we thought what we do is we would do video diaries every night. We would, you know, figure out what to do. Then we would get someone to help us construct it, and then we would put it together. We had a very, you know, from the very beginning, we had a completely clear mind of what we wanted and how we wanted it to be, you know. And then we started thinking, well, if we're going to do video diaries, we may as well, you know, maybe film it, you know. So that kind of, but then the filming side of it, really, no one was really interested in, and we kept telling people about the idea, and people just didn't get it, because there had been really not very much like that at the time, you know, to sort of say, well, it's a bit like this show or that show. There just hadn't really been anything like it. So that was quite tough. And then when we pitched ideas to people, we say, well, we're going to go on this big trip, we're going to travel around the world, and, you know, we're going to go to these different countries. And they say, well, what's going to happen? And we say, I don't know. So that didn't really work very well for a TV show. So that was that was actually very difficult to get. And that came later. And we had to go to Australia when Ewan was making a Star Wars, I think. And we did over a weekend, we did a little pilot, you know, we went off and camped in south, just outside Sydney, and made a little kind of thing to show people what we did. And one of the funniest things was when we were in Australia, we thought we'd go to Channel 10 and one of the big channels and see if they would pitch in and you know, co-produce it. So we got this guy who was really big at the time in Australia, and we pitched him the idea, told him about two guys on bikes, etc. And we said, and we finished the pitch and said, well, what do you think? And he looked at us and he said, do you want me to tell you what I really think? We go, yeah, tell us what you really think. He goes, I think two wankers on motorcycles.
Not the kind of headline you were hoping to get.
And that was that. So we thought, well, okay, well, he's not going to do anything. Anyway, what was really good about that one was that like a year and a half later, we sold him a long way round for quite a lot of money. So that was quite nice. But that's kind of how it went. So it came right at the time when I mean, I remember leaving my London with Ewan. I remember leaving with my wife and kids, and I think we were doing a roof extension or something, and a mortgage, and really honestly, I had about 10 grand in the bank to my name, and I'd taken a bit of an advance in order to be able to cover us for the trip. But you know, this was, I suppose, and then I don't know, and then we came back and we made the movie, and anyway, everything changed.
I'm curious a little bit, because especially factoring in obviously what you mentioned there about like your wife, your job, the kids, all of those sorts of things. At what point during any of the trips, especially the first one, did you think this is going somewhere? And I don't mean like actually, as in you started getting some of these experiences, because especially when you kind of ventured outside of Europe and you started getting into the more less developed countries and some of the more off-road and all of that, and meeting the different people. At what point, because obviously I'd imagine you sat chatting to a few of the camera team, and Claudio, I'm sure, was putting in some ideas of actually going, this is incredible, the stuff you're showing. Was there like a specific point on that journey where that kind of penny dropped?
No, it was just, it was, I think we were just having an event. I think it was so, you know, going through Eastern Europe, I mean, sort of going through Europe into Germany. It wasn't until we got to Eastern Europe that things started to get a little bit more interesting. And I have to, I think Ewan and I and so forth, I think, and with Russ and Dave, who were sort of loosely following us in the trucks, the idea was that we would hook up with them maybe 3 or 4 days or so, because in those days you had the little video tapes, and so you know, you couldn't hold on to videotapes for 10 days, because can you imagine if you destroyed, damaged them, or something went wrong? I mean, and this type of TV show, it's all just whatever happens. You're just filming whatever happens, and so the idea we'd meet up every 3 or 4. Anyway, we got to Prague, I think, at some stage, and we're all thinking, fucking hell, not much has been going on, and will there be something going on? And so we were definitely concerned about that, but then things just started to kick off, and once we got into Ukraine onwards, it just was bonkers. I mean, and if anyone's seen the TV show, they can certainly see there was definitely nothing made up on that one. It was just, you just sat there, and I would sit in the tent, I'd wake up in the tent, and I'd shout over to you, and I said, so you up? And he goes, well, I am now. And I said, well, what's going to happen today? And he goes, I have no fucking idea, but you just knew that something was going to happen. And so that was brilliant. But at no time did we really think, oh, we've got a show here. We've got, I think we were so busy, especially when you get into Eastern Europe and Ukraine and then into Mongolia and Far East Russia. It was just about, it was sort of not survival. I mean, it was, you just had to sort of try and get each day done. There was always something going to happen, so we had no time to think. And funny enough, when we came back and started editing the show, then it all started to look quite good, and we thought, oh, this is going to be good, but it wasn't an overnight success. It played on I think it played like 40 something times on Sky One, and the first number of times it played, it had success, but it wasn't that instant thing where 1 million people watched it, and it was a bit of a slow burner to start off with, and then people just started talking about it, and I think it was momentum, I think. And I think we got lucky with the timing as well, because I think just at that time, and I think it was 2004 or so that we did it, people were just starting to look for a bit more of adventure. So not just go to the beach, but they wanted that kind of idea of an adventure holiday. So have your first 3 or 4 days doing some kind of fun activity, and then earning your last few days on the beach. That was all just starting to be something that people were interested in. And so when Long Way came out, I think it was good timing, and we kind of crested on that wave and followed that trend. So I think we got lucky as well.
It's interesting. I speak to obviously lots of different people, and they talk about the value of luck, and nothing like this comes easy. The volume of work to get even to the start line,
huge,
something like this is huge. So having gone on that journey now, let's strip it back and pull the curtain back a little bit. What were some of the massive headaches and hurdles and challenges? Because I think back to some of the stuff that happened to you in Dakar, as well as all these other up, down and round trips. Actually, it's not been plain sailing and really, really easy. And I think it's really helpful for people to hear out there that life isn't all just one big straight line. There are ups and downs, but actually you can get through it.
No, it is. I mean, for sure. I mean, I've explained a little bit about Long Way, and that it wasn't this, instant thing. It was hard graft to get the money, to get everything, and plus the fact we didn't really know what we were doing either. We had absolutely no idea. We were talking to lots of people who'd done bits of the journey, but there weren't that many people who'd done the whole thing, and so we was trying to sort of pull all that together. But because of that, and because of Ewan and I doing that, that journey really, really changed my life. And I came back. Eventually was successful. Ewan and I'd always spoken about the Dakar Rally, and we often spoke about it on the TV show. When we're going through heavy sand or some really difficult place, you'd become on the radio, and Ewan would say, oh, I'm having a Dakar moment or something like that, and you'd be out, and it'd be just amazing riding in the middle of nowhere, and you were just on it, and it was just fantastic. So we had these amazing ups and downs, and then you'd be falling flat on your ass and thinking how I ended up on the ground, and how did I crash? But but because of all of that, and because of the success of that, it changed my life completely. And suddenly I was talking to these different TV stations, and they were sort of saying, well, what do you want to do next? And I'm saying, well, I'd like to do the Dakar Rally next, and on a motorbike. And then people going, well, what's that race? And go, well, you know, I mean, in France and Italy and Spain and all these countries, you know, these Dakar riders are gods. You know, in Britain, no one knows who. I mean, no one knows it. Sam Sunderland, you know, British rider, won it for the second time this year. I mean, they were posting who won the car on the back pages of the Dakar Rally, but they didn't. None of the British newspapers wrote about Sam Sunderland, the British guy, the only British man ever to win the Dakar Rally, and he's just won it twice. Anyway, so I said, look, we'd love to do that. So suddenly the opportunities just came along, you know, and it's very easy to say, oh, I'm going to go and do the Dakar Rally. It's a bit like saying, oh, I'm going to get a motorbike and I'm going to race the TT. You know, it's the Dakar Rally is as dangerous as the TT. And you know, I think the death rate is 2.1 or something is the death rate on the Dakar Rally. But then nobody talks about all the terrible injuries. You know, there's just, you know, I mean, we started off in a field of 250 riders and only 68 finished. You know, and what sadly Andy Caldicott lost his life in the year I did it, and then I broke my hands and on day 5, and then I was working as sort of team manager, I suppose, and I just kept seeing, you know, person after person being carted off to hospital and brutal. But that was another one that was really difficult to, you know, I mean, it's like all these things. I remember when we did Long Way Round. We had all this at the beginning. I don't know if anyone remembers, but at the beginning of the show, we had all this SAS training, this special training that, you know, I can't remember what they called it now, which was just hilarious fun to do. But in the you learned a lot. But one of the XSS guys said, look, if you can survive the prep, you know, the journey's easy. And that's, I think it's really true. By the time if you can get to the start line of anything, then, you know, and that's the easy bit, is doing it. The hard bit is getting there, and then, you know, when you get back, you have to put it all together. But yeah. So, and sometimes when you're on these journeys, you forget that actually this is the easy bit, you know, and you have to remind, because, you know, if you're off for 3 or 4 months at a time, and sometimes you sit there and it's difficult, or a difficult place to get through, and you're sitting on your ass and you're thinking, gosh, shit, what the fuck am I doing here? You know, and you kind of got to, and then you think, I've got 2.5, 3 months to go, and oh my, you know, and you sometimes it's better just to focus on the day, you know, and getting through the day sometimes.
I think it's quite interesting what you mentioned there around that, because if you think of the way that the show's put together, yes, you had a cameraman following you for quite a bit of it, but actually there were quite a few moments when you're in the tents and all these other things that were actually, it was just you and your own cameras. And there's some really raw moments that were kind of captured that I guess you probably look back on and go, wow, I don't even remember that, or I remember that was such a hard day. But you capture it in its rawness, in the sense of you haven't got a director sitting there going, right, we need you to start, and now you're just grabbing the camera and talking to it. And it was a really powerful part of all of the shows that you've done, is actually that capturing the human element of it, the vulnerability, if you like.
Yeah, and I think we all, you know, that's what I mentioned it before a little bit about how Ewan and I had a really clear idea of what we wanted for the show to be, was to have that as little interference as possible, to be left independent as much as possible as you can do, and then the whole idea was at the end that Ewan and I wouldn't really take part in the editing, and that we trusted Russ and Dave to not, you know, because in editing you can make someone look like a complete nasty person or a good person, but we wanted to try and to be as honest as possible, and to show the warts and all, and you know, and I think maybe part of the success of the show is that you know, everybody can relate to that, whether or not you're traveling by train or in a car or overland or walking or bicycle or whatever your form of transport is. I think we can all relate to the tough bits, and really on any trip, you know, the bit on a holiday or whatever, the bits you remember the most are the bits that went wrong, you know, or the bits that you found yourself in a bit of a sticky situation, and you thought, ooh, this is dodgy, or whatever. Those are the things you remember. You don't remember the days where things went smoothly. They just blend into each other.
What's the most memorable bit for you now, looking back? You've had a bit of it, especially after the first two trips, you had quite a big period of time to reflect. What was that standout moment for you?
Oh, I think probably Mongolia was probably one of the best parts of the whole trip, and that was some of the most challenging, you know, and that was the first time that I realized in Mongolia was, I think Russ had rolled the vehicle, and they were about a day or so behind us, and we heard, we were literally on the telephone on the sat phone when Jimmy watched Russ roll the vehicle, and we thought, give us your location and we'll head back to you and help out, and then we realized it was a day's riding just to try and help out, so that was not going to work, and then you suddenly realize, and luckily they were fine and there was no problem, and they just had a logistical nightmare sort of doing that, but then it was at that point you suddenly realize, shit, you know, that's when I stopped popping wheelies and when I stopped fucking around, because I just thought, Christ, if something does go wrong, you know, it's a 2.5 day overland to get to a hospital, and then when you get to that hospital in Mongolia, you don't really want to be in that hospital, and there's no air ambulance, there's no helicopter, there's nothing, you know, and so that was like, shit, we really are. That was when I realized that we really were on a proper adventure. But I mean, funny things happen to us all the time, you know. And I remember one time we were trying to get into Ukraine, and we had some paperwork problem, and it was just taking forever to get into Ukraine, and hours. I think we were there for 18 hours or something. And it was all because one piece of paper was a photocopy, not an original piece of paper. So always take originals with you, always make copies, but have the originals. Anyway, so I don't know, it was 11 o'clock at night or something, and Ewan says, right, Charlie, come on. So the bikes were parked by the barrier, and he says, come on, Charlie, we're going to have a talk to this to the security guard. And Ewan looked at him and he said, these aren't the bikes you're looking for, move aside. And the policeman looked at Ewan and I, and he goes, fuck off. And we ran off like that, and Ewan's going, well, it worked in the movies. And it was very funny. And so we had, you know, there were lots of great moments, and there were lots of moments when you're sitting there and you're riding along, and then you could just, and you know, it's when you're traveling with someone, it's a bit like a marriage. So you're going to have days where you're just not in a good mood, you know, and that everything that person you're traveling with annoys you. You know, I remember sometimes, and I'm sure Ewan was exactly the same. Sometimes you'd look at the person that you're following. If I was following Ewan, or if he was following me, and you'd be looking at that person, and just by the way they were riding, it was annoying you, you know. And so, but we were very lucky. We both somehow always managed to dovetail each other. So one was in such a good mood, then the other would always pick you up or stuff. So it was all right.
So one of the things that I had heard from one of our listeners was they actually wanted to know, having done all these different trips to all these incredibly different places, what's the one thing that you consistently take with you every single place you've ever been on your on your trips?
Oh, it's actually, well, it's a good question, but it's actually quite easy to answer. That is two things really I take with me, and one is a silk liner. You know those little silk liners that you sleep in a sleeping bag or something like that, and baby wipes, and so for a silk liner, if you're in a dodgy, you know, there's a lot of people always say, oh, you traveled and you got to stay in loads of hotels and how wonderful and stuff, but as I don't know, anyone knows who's traveled a lot, you know, hotels are not often mostly not the kind of things that you expect, and so some of the dodgiest beds I've slept in and stuff. And if you just slip that silk liner into the bed and get one which you can hook the pillow over, and then you can sleep in your silk liner, because bed bugs can't go through silk. So and it just means you can sleep in your own thing instead of a nasty bed. I mean, I remember one time in Africa, I was slept in this hotel room, and I went down to the bike and got my tent out and pitched the tent on the bed and slept in the tent on the bed, because that was better, you know. So you know, so those two things are and you know, nowadays, you know, your phone is extraordinary. You know, you get one of those. I don't know if you use those quad locks. Have you used quad lock? Those they're amazing, and you put that on, and then you just get a local SIM card with loads of data, and you get Google Maps, and it shows. I mean, with whole through South America and Central America and everything, whenever you came to even the most remote village, you would just hover the map over the village on the map, and you would put in B&B or youth hostel or something, and it all came up, and you know, it was just incredible. So that phone is unbelievable, and then it connects you with your family, it connects you with everything, you know. Incredible.
Awesome. Well, there's one more question I've got to ask, and it's one I ask every single one of our guests. If you could go back to before you got on the bike for the first time, and you had to give a message to yourself, having lived all of that and done all the things that perhaps you could never have imagined, what would you say to your childhood self?
Concentrate more in school, I would have said. I was thick as shit in school. I don't know. I'm not sure if I would do anything different. I'm not sure, because I think all the avenues that I went down, you know, if you want to look at sort of fate, something like that, all the avenues I went down, I would never necessarily have maybe ended up meeting that person if I hadn't have done what I did, you know, and so so it was so it's difficult to do. I think if I could have, I would have maybe concentrated a little bit more on my acting career, and maybe, but you know, if my acting career hadn't gone sort of downhill, I would have been doing the painting and decorating, but then maybe I would never have met Ewan, and you know, and I would have never been more grateful in all my life not to have to pick up a paintbrush again and paint a ceiling, which I'm actually doing right now at the moment. I'm staining one of the sheds in my house, and I hate it. I hate painting. I promised myself I'd never paint again, and there I am slopping stain onto wood. But I guess no, I don't think so. I think, and the only regrets that I've ever had in my life are the motorcycles that I've sold, and I wish I'd kept them. But I think the rest of it, you know, I don't think we should ever regret what we've done, because that only leads us to where we are now. So I had a huge motorcycle accident in 2016. I smashed my legs up really badly, and it was really touch and go whether or not I was going to keep one or both of my legs. And I remember waking up the next morning, having gone through surgery and stuff, and luckily it was looking okay. And I woke up and I looked down, and I saw both my legs were in plaster. My right hand was in plaster, and I only had one hand left, and I really was beaten up. I'd smacked the most painful bit was when I clipped the curb of the road on my arse, and that was the biggest bruise I think I've ever had in my life. I mean, the most damage you can do without breaking your hip, and I woke up and I was feeling really sorry for myself, and I looked at the guy. I realized I was in the bedroom with another person, and he was in the other bed, and he was a motorcycle accident, and he was in so much worse than I was, and I looked at my injuries and I thought, it's not so bad really. And then from that point on, it was just, when am I going to get back on a bike?
Well, I'll make sure we include the link, because there's a little bit of footage out there that shows from the hospital after that, and it's unfathomable going from that level of injury all the way through to going through long way up. But it's incredible. It's inspiring for sure.
You know, it's a you know, Long Way Up is an interesting TV show in the fact that, not because of Ewan and I, but because of the electric of it all, and the negativity that's around electric vehicles, and everyone, the terrible range anxiety that everybody has, and the so it's I think you know, for that part of it, I think it's good that you can show that it's not just, you know, that electric vehicles, there is a place for electric vehicles, not just petrol. And you know, range anxiety is not a new phenomena. It when people went from horses and cart to cars, there was terrible range anxiety. I mean, you know, you could have petrol at home and drive into town, but there was no guarantee that there was going to be petrol in town, and you could only buy petrol in a chemist if they had it. So you know, what we're feeling now is something that we've all felt before.
It's quite a timely discussion, I guess, for us, because I think moving forwards over the next few years, it is going to become more mainstream. But it's really nice to see that example and showing the challenges of it, but actually that you can overcome it. So I think that's a nice way to pull it all together. Charley, thank you so much for your time.
No
we're
worries.
going to include the links to the books. I say DVDs, but it's all streaming now. But there's so many different things you've done, and we'll make sure we signpost everyone to them. So just a huge thank you for your time today.
Listen, anytime, and I'm sure I'll see you down the road. One day, I'm sure, on a bike.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. And don't forget, we've got a back catalogue of content that goes all the way back to January 2020, including fighter pilots, Olympic champions, TV presenters, and inspiring authors. We'd really appreciate it if you can give us a quick rate and review, however you're joining us today. And if you don't want to miss out on any future episodes, make sure you hit subscribe. Our community update drops once a month, and we've got some great guest content being added, so be sure to sign up for that. And finally, we're all about inspiring and supporting as many people as possible. So if you can share this episode with one person that you think would enjoy it, that would be really, really cool. Thank you again for joining us for another episode of the Rogue Monkey Podcast.